think about as business leaders, as we're to ensure we're operating as good as citizens for the larger community. So for this final talk, we're going to have three of the most prominent nonprofit leaders in the community with us. Jennifer is going to lead us in a chat with Johnathan and Lisa. And my hope is that it opens our eyes to the broader context of what we're building here. So, Jennifer.
Thank you so much and for having me, and I love being grouped in with the most prominent nonprofit leaders in the region.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm not mad at it. Now, Lisa's used to that. Lisa's like, every time. Yeah, so it's true. So thank you so much for having me. And like the previous panel, we are not necessarily the group you would see at a startup innovation tech conference. But I'm really excited, especially after listening to, I always love listening to Carissa, so thank you, but listening to the issues around climate, innovation, the need for now. And so this is a lot of what we're going to talk about as well. And also breaking down silos and where you think just because your lane is this way doesn't necessarily set you up for the future. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about. So my name is Jennifer Gray Thompson. I am the CEO of a nonprofit called After the Fire, and we were born in the 2017 fires as Rebuild North Bay. And since then, as you know, we've had multiple mega fires, floods, plague, all of these things. And so one of the things we did a couple of years ago, Lisa was on my board at the time, was pivot to become more national. And now we also have a startup for-profit B Corp that I have that really advises big companies on how to put the why in when they are in the space of disaster contracting, because that's one of the things that's missing, really important part of this conversation. So that's who I am, and I'm hoping that Lisa and then Johnathan can introduce themselves.
Sure. I'm Lisa Carreno. I'm the president and CEO of United Way of the Wine Country. United Way is probably a brand that you all have heard of for many, many, many years. It's a 140-plus-year-old organization, but United Way of the Wine Country is not your grandmother's United Way. In the wine country, which our region stretches up to the Oregon border, our focus is on equity and family financial stability building, and in just a little bit I'll explain why our focus is so narrowly tailored to equity and financial stability building in our 5-county region.
Good to see everyone. Johnathan Logan, VP for Community Engagement at the Marin Community Foundation, and we've been around for about 40 years or so. Typical community foundation. We support folks throughout the Bay Area, actually, in achieving their philanthropic goals. And the heart of our work is in Marin County, where we're looking to solve some of the most entrenched issues of the day. And as Lisa mentioned, equity is certainly part of that equation, something that we're looking to build more of for residents across a wide spectrum of issue areas, everything from health to affordable housing to income equality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I have the privilege of overseeing the impact programs with the foundation. And so we make grants into many great partner organizations that do the real heavy lift of solving the day-to-day challenges that sometimes go unnoticed. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second.
So one of the most important things that we do, I've worked in 18 mega fires now across the American West, is I always pull the demographics before we go. And I want to know what happened, where did the fires start, did somebody start it or something started, or was it lightning? And I want to know before I get there, I want to be educated as I walk in, because that's where my business is in that community, figuring out how to design services for locally led recoveries. So one of the things that's really important is know your demographic, right? And so beautiful thing that Lisa and Johnathan are going to speak to is what is our demographic? So we're going to go ahead and start with Johnathan on this question.
Yeah, so in Marin County, I sort of characterize it as a tale of two cities. And if you know anything about Marin, you know there's a lot of affluence and beautiful landscapes. Robert Wood Johnson, which is a foundation on the East Coast, they rank health outcomes in counties throughout the state. And Marin County typically ranks number one. And so that's great. Like, we're super proud of that reality. But when you start to drill down on the numbers and disaggregate the data, you start to see that in certain pockets, certain communities, health disparities are pretty stark. And so you have overall in Marin County like an 85 to 86 year life expectancy for most individuals. For African Americans, that number is closer to 76 years. And so, and sometimes these individuals live in the same zip code right next door to each other. Before philanthropy, I was a general manager in Marin City. And in Marin City, it's right next door to Sausalito, and we sort of saw those really stark inequalities that existed. And so with this tale of two cities, what we've come to find as being super instructive for us is to understand the data at like a big level, but also be sure to disaggregate, because it tells a more rich story about what's actually happening in the community. And the reason why I think that's important is that, you know, when you look at how disparities within communities and across races, how it actually impacts us as a society, and particularly in the economy. There was a study done, and it basically said that 14%, we see a 14% decrease in our GDP because we have these disparities that exist. And so that's really what's hopeful for me, is if we figured out a way to solve these problems, it's not only good for the individual, but it's good for society, and it's not only good for the social equity within community, but also the economy. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us to collectively be thinking about what is a common cause that we all have as residents within the North Bay, and how do we work together around some common issues that we share for the betterment of the entire region. And that's what the real opportunity is.
And Lisa, you want to talk to us about the Sonoma County?
Yeah, so Sonoma County is a predominantly rural community. When you take a good look at the map, there are pockets of big populations, such as here in Petaluma, Rohnert Park, Santa Rosa, obviously, but there are also big rural stretches across our landscape up there. And we are a smaller county than we were before the 2017 fires in terms of population. But when we really look at the lived experiences of folks who call Sonoma County home, here are some of the statistics that are true that they bump up against and make it difficult to make ends meet here at home. Something on the order of now, because of the fires and because of the expense of living in our community, nearly 1 in 2 Sonoma County households is housing burdened, which means that they're spending more than 30% of their monthly income just on their housing. And when you look at specific households, 7 in 10 households led by single moms and 5 in 10 households led by single dads are struggling to make ends meet. They're living below the United Way's real cost measure. The real cost of living in Sonoma County for a family of 4 is over $93,000, but the average income is only about $60,000. So you do the math. Now, as business people, think about the fact that those are the folks that you're employing. Those are the folks that you are trying to attract to your product if you're a consumer products company. If you are a client services provider, those are the folks that you're trying to draw into your practice. But, honestly, they're needing to make choices. 1 in 2 families in Sonoma County is needing to make choices between putting food on the table, paying their rent, and otherwise paying for their living expenses. That's the reality of what's going on in our community right now. We have, and just to a point that Johnathan made, among communities of color, over the last decade in Sonoma County, the life expectancy of African Americans in our community has declined by 10 years, according to the Portrait of Sonoma County. And the same is true for people who are part of our indigenous communities. So people of color are really struggling. When you dig into those numbers and you look beyond the economics, you look at race as a social determinant of health, what you see is a community that is struggling.
Thank you. And I think that sometimes, when we hear or have these conversations, they're uncomfortable, or you think like, you're like, oh, this is too big for me to handle, or how do I actually integrate it in? But I think one of the things that we want to talk to you about is by integrating it into your business plan, just like climate, you're actually building resilience for your own business plan as well. And it's such an important piece to really look at, to not be divorced from that or feel like it's too big. And we understand, we work in really hard issues. And I just, as a side note, the Center for Effective Philanthropy came out with a study last July finding that there was a lot of talk all across philanthropy about climate, a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of new titles. They literally said hand-wringing and no action, 2%. That is all philanthropy spends on climate, 2%. And it's not that people don't care, but they literally looked at it, and this was an anonymous survey, and they said, it's too hard. I don't know what to do. But the way to do it is really to innovate. It's really to integrate what the problems are, to turn those into market gaps and opportunities to do even better, and not to be afraid of these conversations. You don't need to walk away feeling terrible or bad or it's too much. It's like, oh, okay, if that's the case, and if I am actually building a company for next generation, what does that look like, and how can I actually attend to these issues? Because the next generation cares about different things than we do. Gen X is not the same as Gen Z. So one of the things that I wanted to go ahead and start again with Johnathan is to talk about what would you like to see, so what are some action items for the startup community, and how can we increase the likelihood that we can actually build equitable economies, especially we're very fortunate in Sonoma and Marin counties. I see a lot of counties, especially in the American West. We have opportunities to do collective impact that resonates way beyond where we are right now. So Johnathan?
Yeah, so you guys know your business way better than I do, obviously, and you know where there are opportunities to be thoughtful around some of these things. So I don't have like the silver bullet for what you could do, but what I would say is that I think there's something to be said about having diversity within the room. Both in terms of like thinking about how do you create products and services that serve the widest swath of people, and it's not only good for society, it's good for bottom line as well. And you really get the benefit from the collective genius of what society has to offer. And so I think there's something there for sure. I have some friends that are in the room, so 1% for education. You guys have all read about kind of what Patagonia is doing. It's taking its profits and putting it into society for good. So there are things that we can be doing as a community of entrepreneurs to really think about how to support our communities and address some of the most pressing needs. I would imagine building and running a business is a full-time job, probably plus. And so when you layer on top of that fact, like you have a life, you have a family, you have all these other things, it's kind of tough to do that. So my advice would be not to think about it as an add-on, but to Jen's point, like just something that you integrate into your business practice. And so I'm happy to sort of think through those types of things. Those are the interesting sort of intersections of the work that I get to do, where it's not all about just serving the nonprofits, but also thinking about how business, how government plays together in order to make the society that we're actually going to be proud of, that we're leaving to our kids and our grandkids. And so I think Community Foundations, United Way, we're here to partner with you all to sort of think through how you have impact in that way.
You know, I'd like to lift up a few solutions that I've been here all day listening to all of the presentations, and you guys have already come up with a lot of great solutions, and I don't think that, so I want to be the person that helps you connect the dots with the things that you're already doing. So all morning long, we heard about the power of relationships in every single story we heard. We heard about how relationships led to innovation, relationships led to solution thinking that broke new ground, that redesigned and iterated a product over and over and over again. And what happens when you lean into hard conversations and diversity, bringing diversity of thought into the conversations that you're having, those hard conversations are transformed and those relationships are transformed. And as a result of that, your business is fueled and powered and I think divinely inspired by the magic that happens out of that work together. So just in the conversation that Carissa and Roland and Tim just had, I want to point out a few things that I heard them say. First of all, have hard conversations about how attention to social equity, race equity, economic equity affects the ecosystem in which you are operating, because it absolutely does. And if you aren't sure, ask your employees. And if they aren't sure, ask your customers. Ask them how they're challenged and what their challenges are, and really listen to what they're saying. You don't need to know the answers. You just want to listen. And listening is your path to innovation anyway, right? Then I love this idea that beyond that call for inclusion, think about how you work cooperatively. Roland talked about his cooperative, that they intend with their company to share profits from their company as a cooperative with the farmers who are helping to build the work and the product and the outcome that are the goals of his company. Think about how your profitability is transformed by becoming a cooperative. That's how you build sustainability, right? And then the last hopeful thing I want to say is give yourself permission to focus on the hard questions. And why that's important, I think, is because to the extent that we keep kicking it down the can, or kicking the can down the lane, we are, disabling, disarming, divesting ourselves from the promise of what we potentially can create when we put our heads together. There's so much, honestly, there is so much promise in what you guys are already doing. Do more of that and do it with intention. That really is what gives me hope out of spending the day with you guys today.
Can I maybe just one other additional thought? For some of this stuff, it hasn't been done, so we have to sort of think about how do we build it. And as entrepreneurs, I'm sure you guys have tried things, they failed, you try again, fail, keep iterating until you ultimately get to a product that makes sense, and then it's off to the races at that point. I think a similar mindset makes a ton of sense when we're talking about how this community can be even more fully integrated with all of the needs of the North Bay. And so there's an opportunity to do that. And, some simple solutions could be thinking about like fellowships and, they have entrepreneur in residence programs within some VCs and other companies. How might we think about bringing in folks from some of these target communities that have been underinvested in to actually learn the business? And then you start to build a pipeline of folks that could actually, be in these same spaces with us all, having these same conversations and helping us do it even better than what it's being done now. So I just think there's a lot of opportunity. We just have to be open to exploring what those opportunities are and doing the tough work. But it's definitely doable.
And one of the best things about a room like this is it's full of disruptors. And that's so important. Like the first few years I did this, I was like, well, I was kind of trying to listen to experts, and I was like, sorry, screw it. I'm just going to disrupt the whole space of disaster from my little corner of the world and the way that it's been defined for maybe 100 years. Well, this is the era of megafire, so I've already been disrupted, so now I'm going to do it this way and see how it works out. And it actually is what catapulted me into a national presence and a national voice for wildfire. One of the things I love about entrepreneurs is that they have the ability to see a market gap, to disrupt the market. You can disrupt how equity is done in your sphere. You can do that. You can talk to people. And it's one of the crazy things that I do is when I walk into a community, I actually ask them what they need and how I can help. I know, right? I don't just go in, I'm like, here's what I'm willing to do for you. And I get the best research and development. Like, I am a hot ticket for the disaster contracting space because they're like, how do we differentiate? I'm like, I know, this is crazy, but you can actually make relationships with the people there and ask them what they need and then design services. I will help you do that. But these are the things, like, you have permission to disrupt equity in a way that actually solves the problem, especially the one in front of you where you're choosing to do your startup, which is why the knowledge of the people that we have up here is so valuable. And so I hope that, so one of the things that we wanted to do, and I want to make sure I'm giving enough time to do this, is to sort of leave you like feeling inspired and giving you like, a path forward. And so I'm going to go ahead and toss it first. Oh, I was asked to do this. I love this author. She's an essayist named Rebecca Solnit. She's actually based in San Francisco. And she wrote a wonderful book called A Paradise Built in Hell, all about how people behave in disaster. And it turns out, except for the pandemic, we don't get our guns out and start shooting each other. Instead, we share every morsel of what we have because humans are generally good people. And so she wrote another book called Hope in the Dark, and that's what I'm reading now. And it's one of those things that it gives you all of the sort of a roadmap and a way to maintain your hope at times that are a little difficult. We're changing a lot right now, but that also means there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to share lessons and to inspire each other. So Lisa, on this one, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I'll actually quote one of our earlier speakers. Sarah Schaff said, at the end of her remarks that sharing her failures made her failures more valuable to her. What we're talking about doing is building economic equity in an ecosystem because economic equity for all improves the ecosystem's resiliency. It improves everybody's capacity to flourish and thrive. And so when we pay attention to racial justice and social justice and economic justice, we're improving the well-being of the whole ecosystem. Well, let's learn from the mistakes we've made in the past. Let's talk about where we have failed or where we don't see and start there with that vulnerability. Because when we start having those conversations, then we're going to find ourselves in conversations that lead to solutions, that lead to co-design with the community, that lead to innovation. And until we let ourselves be that vulnerable, and honestly, that's what it's going to take, we're not going to get where we need to go. We're going to be in that, that zero-sum game that Roland was pointing to, that in 20 years, none of what we have around us is sustainable.
Yeah, so I think I'll close on just a story of and picking up on this notion of being a disruptor. So philanthropy, we have historically sort of said, like, we have money, community has needs, we'll design some interesting programs, we'll release dollars that follow the programs in order to serve the community. And a few years ago, we said, let's actually maybe flip that on its head a bit, and let's say similar to how you guys would engage your customer or would-be customer, we said, to the community, we want to solve this problem of moms who are moving towards self-sufficiency but had not quite got there yet. And in Marin, these were typically moms of color. And so rather than building a program, we actually went and we had conversations with these moms, sometimes in cafes, sometimes in living rooms, sometimes at parks, wherever they wanted to talk to us. And we basically said, like, what are your aspirations for your life and for your kids, for your family? And then what are the barriers that are preventing you from getting there? So we heard all these really great stories of resilience. We also heard, really despairing kind of stories about feeling isolated in Marin, so on and so forth. And we said we can't kind of unhear what we just heard and what we just saw. And so we said, rather than designing a program ourselves, let's bring these same moms in and talk to them about designing and co-designing solutions that would address the needs that they had. And so one of the things that Mom said is that we don't need another financial literacy class. Like, we just need money in our checkbooks. And so the light bulb went off in our heads. We were like, why don't we just write checks to moms? Like, let's test out this notion. And you guys have probably heard about it, but guaranteed income is like a real thing. And it's something that I actually think as a society we're going to have to grapple with as a policy solution to some of the income inequalities that we see, just given, the progressions with AI and, some of the other things that will mean that the jobs won't actually be here for folks. So anyway, we kicked off this guaranteed income pilot where we gave 125 moms $1,000 a month for 2 years, and we're coming up on the end of 2 years. We're going to extend it out another year and kind of taper off those payments over time. But what we found out was that moms reported that they were, re-enrolling in school and getting college degrees. We heard that moms were spending more time with their kids, where they had been living in an overcrowded apartment. They were able to get an apartment and have the space for their kids to sort of thrive and grow, and for them to have their mental health tended to, and not just feel like they were under the weight of not having enough resources. And so this idea of like the answers being within the communities that we're talking about engaging in this work and working with and working for is something that I found to be super helpful. And so this idea of getting folks into your spaces and being in the spaces where people are, I just think it makes a ton of sense. And I have a lot of hope that, this is where we can take society as a whole. We need to be more connected. And we saw that through the pandemic. We saw how, being isolated, just what that impact was. And that was kind of at the far extreme. I think we can swing that pendulum the other way and really start thinking about how do we strengthen the social bonds that we all want to share and that we should share with each other. And it ultimately leads to a better world. I guess our time is up.
And in case you're wondering about the impact of a single mom in Marin, remember that Tupac went to Tam High and was raised in Marin City, and he changed the world. So, side note, really love that guy. Talk about a disruptor, correct? You never know who you're investing in or why, but also one of the things that made me think of that is the strength and the power of the phrase, I don't know. That's an okay thing. That's not weak to say I don't know, and to say I don't even know how I would do equity in my startup. I have no idea, but maybe I'll go and I'll actually ask someone, and not just the experts at the table, not just the most prominent nonprofit leaders in the North Bay, but us as well. So, and Lisa, did you want to do how about 30 seconds each on a closing thought? Did I already close your thought?
No. I just really the invitation and permission to all of you to see the spaces that Johnathan and I work in as the spaces that matter to you. I just, I want to, again, the answer to how is yes, not what. That's Peter Block. The answer to how is yes. I want to be involved. I want to be at the table. I want to have different conversations. Let's do that.
Yeah, and I would just say thank you guys for all of the work that you do. This is what helps us build a healthy society. This is part of it. And so to the extent that we can partner, connect dots, and make sure that all facets of society is taken care of, I think it's a great vision. And so I thank Zach for your leadership, your vision for what this organization is now and what it will be in the future. We totally appreciate those contributions.
And thank you all for staying to the end.
Wine time.